Okay, in your notebook. Finding percent. A couple things I want to talk about before we get into finding percent. Okay, the first thing, if we have the fraction 3/8, okay, what does that mean? 3 parts out of 8 is colored in or eaten, something, 3 out of 8 is something, okay? Now, how do you change a fraction to a decimal? Thank you.
Did you divide the top by the bottom?
Yeah, divide the top by the bottom. Okay, so you don't need to write this down, so you would divide the top by the bottom. Obviously 8 does not go into 3, so we put a decimal and add a 0, move that decimal up. Now 8 goes into 33 times, 3 times 8 is 24, subtract, you get 6. Add another 0, bring that 0 down. 8 goes into 60 7 times, 7 times 8 is 56, subtract, you get 4. Add another 0, bring that 0 down. 8 goes into 45 times, 5 times 8 is 40, subtract, you get 0. Okay? Question about how to change a fraction to a decimal. Now, if we had the decimal 1800, how would you change that to a fraction? How do you change a decimal to a fraction?
Would you put it over 100 or
Put whatever 100.
the
18.
You take the number that is to the right of the decimal, and that is your numerator. And then the place value of the last digit, which in this situation is the 100th, then that would be your denominator. Okay? Now you would reduce this, divide them both by 2, and you would get 9/50. Okay? Now just to prove it, that 9/50 is the same as 1800th. If we divide the top by the bottom, put a decimal out of 0, move that decimal up. 50 goes into 90 one time. 1 times 50 is 50. Subtract, you get 40. Add another 0, bring that 0 down. And 50 goes into 400 8 times. 8 times 50 is 400. Subtract, you get 0. And once again, we're back to our 1800. Okay? Questions how to change a fraction to a decimal or a decimal to a fraction. Okay. Now, the first thing I want to talk to you guys about as far as finding percent. Okay? Many times, they're going to give you a drawing, or they're going to give you a scenario, and they're going to tell you a certain amount out of a total amount went to whatever, went to class or did their homework. Okay? So, when finding a percent, the first thing you're going to do is write it as a fraction. Okay, so if we had 40 students in the class, and let's say that 25 of those students, you don't need to write this down, 25 of the students went on the trip. And say we want to find what percent went on the trip. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, since we want to find out what percent went on the trip, we're going to write the fraction of how many went on the trip. So what would our fraction be? Evan?
40 over 25.
25 over 40. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write it as a fraction. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to change the fraction to the decimal. And once again, how do you do that? Divide the top by the bottom. Okay, so we have the fraction 25 over 40. So we're going to change it to a decimal. We're going to divide the top by the bottom. 40 does not go into 25, so we put a decimal and add a 0. Move that decimal up. 40 goes into 250 6 times. 6 times 40 is 240. Subtract. Get 0. 5 minus 4 is 1. Add another 0. Bring that 0 down. 40 goes into 100. 2 times. 2 times 40 is 80. Subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. 10 minus 8 is 2. Add another 0. Bring that 0 down. 40 goes into 205 times. 5 times 4 is 200. Subtract, you get 0. Okay, so we changed the fraction to a decimal. The last thing we're going to do is change the decimal to a percent. Now, the way you do that is you move the decimal 2 places to the right. Okay, so now, if we look at our problem over there, we have it as a decimal. So now to change it to a percent, we need to move the decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2, and so that would give us 62 and 5/10%. I'm allergic to you, Aiden. Now, there may be times that they'll ask you to round it to the nearest percent. But once again, if they ask you to round to the nearest percent, that means you must go to the tenth so that you can round it to the ones place. If they don't tell you to round it, okay, typically you round it to the nearest tenth of a percent. Now, why do we move the decimal 2 places to the right? Percent is based out of 100. Is that what you're going to say, Evan?
Yeah.
Okay. Percent is based out of 100. And so basically what we're doing is we're trying to find the equivalent fraction of how many you would get out of 100. Okay, for example, if we had this problem, 25 over 40, since percent is based out of 100, okay, at this rate, how many would you get right out of 100? Well, we work with proportions now, right? We cross multiply. 40 times x gives you 40x, and then 25 times 100 is 2,500. And then you would divide both sides by the 40. They cancel, you're left with x, and you have 2,500 divided by 40. 40 goes into 256 times. 6 times 40 is 240. Subtract, you get 10, bring down to 0. 40 goes into 102 times. 2 times 40 is 80. subtract, you get 20, put a decimal at a 0, bring that 0 down, and 40 goes into 205 times, 5 times 40 is 200, subtract, you get 0, don't forget to bring up the decimal, and there we have our 62 and 5/10. Okay? So percent is based out of 100. Instead of taking it times 100, or setting up that proportion, is it a lot easier just to move the decimal 2 places to the right? Yes. Okay? And so that's how we find percent. Pretty simple, right? Okay, in your notebook, let's just do an example real quick. And we'll try to keep it pretty simple. Let's say we have 12 students. Eight of them wore sneakers. What percent wore sneakers? And so, what's the first thing we do, Declan?
Write a fraction.
We're going to write a fraction. We want to find out what percent wore sneakers. So, we're going to write it as a fraction. How many wore sneakers?
8.
Out of?
12.
So we're going to write the fraction. 8 over 12. Brian, what's the next thing we're going to do after we write it as a fraction? We're going to change it to a decimal by dividing the top by the bottom. Since 12 does not go into 8, we need to put a decimal and add a 0. Now, a lot of times you might hear people say, put a decimal and add 2 zeros. Okay? Why do you think you might put a decimal and add 2 zeros? Evan?
Because 100 has 2 zeros?
Partly right. What's our last step? Move the decimal 2 places to the right. So a lot of times you're going to hear people say, put a decimal and add 2 zeros, because you're going to need to move the decimal to the right 2 places anyway. Okay? So a lot of times you will hear people say, put a decimal and add 2 zeros. Okay? If you don't do that, it's no big deal. It's not the end of the world. So you move the decimal up. 12 goes into 80 6 times. Oh, of all things I would use. 6 times 12 is 72. Subtract. You get 8. Add a 0. Bring that 0 down. 12 goes into 80 6 times. 6 times 12 is 72. Subtract. You get 8. Add another 0. Bring that 0 down. 12 goes into 80 6 times. 6 times 12 is 72. Subtract. You get 8. Add another 0, bring that 0 down, 12 goes into 80 6 times, 6 times 12 is 72, you get 8, and like I said, dumb question for me to ask you. It goes to a repeating decimal, okay? Now, it's fine that we use that, okay? It's not the end of the world, because you'll probably have an example like this on your homework. So we've changed it to a decimal. Okay, now the way we signify a repeating decimal is we put a line over it. That means that it continues repeating. Okay? So now, once we have it as a decimal, what's the next thing we're going to do? Aiden?
Turn into a percentage.
But how do we do that?
Add 2 zeros. Move decimal 2 places to the right.
We're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So 1, 2. So you have this. 66.66666666, and it keeps on going, right? We said at this point, if it doesn't tell you anything different, okay, we're going to round to the nearest tenth of a percent. So if we round to the nearest tenth of a percent, we're going to round to that 6. We look to that 6. That 6 tells us to do what? Round up. So this 6 becomes a, and so you have 66 and 7/10%. Okay? Any questions? Okay, let's get out your whiteboards. I could have used any number.
Don't use 8 12 again.
Why?
Just do the same thing again.
Okay. Okay. If I want to find out what percent is colored in, first thing we're going to do is what? Landon? Go ahead and write it as a fraction. Check your bottom number there, Landon. Check your top number, Dakota. Check your bottom number. There are 9 colored in out of the total of 18. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Out of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, next thing we're going to do. Wyatt?
Change it into a decimal.
By doing what?
Right, top by bottom.
Okay, so change that into a decimal. Okay, so if we divide the top by the bottom, the 18 does not go into 9, so we put a decimal and add a 0, move that decimal up. Now, how many 18s go into 90? Well, 1 goes into 9 how many times? 9. So we check it once. 18 times 9. 9 times 8 is 72. Carry the 7. 9 times 1 is 9. And 7 is 16. Obviously, that's way too big. Okay, so we can try 8 times. 18 times 8. 8 times 8 is 64. Carry the 6. 8 times 1 is 8. 6 is 14. Way too big. 18 times 7. 7 times 8 is 56. Carry the 5. 7 times 1 is 7. And 5 is 12. Still way too big. 18 times 6. 8 times 6 is 48. Carry the 4. 6 times 8 is 6. And 4 is 10. Still too big. 18 times 5. 5 times 8 is 40. Carry the 4. 5 times 1 is 5. And 4 is 9. And that's what we want. It goes 5 times. 5 times 18 is 90. Subtract, you get 0. So as a decimal, it is 5/10. Okay, now change that to a percent. Check your data. read it once. Aiden, read it. Read it to yourself. Okay, right now we have the decimal here. It says to change the decimal to a percent by moving the decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2, decimal's here, and that gives you 50%. 50% is the same as half, right? And so half of that would have been colored in. Okay? Let's do another one. Let's say we had 25 eggs. 16 were broken. What percent were broken? First thing you're going to do is what? Write as a fraction. Your fraction would be 16 broken out of 25. Next thing you're going to do, change it to a decimal. Go ahead and do that. Don't erase it. Don't erase it. Just, you might use it later on. Check it. Change a fraction to a decimal. We divide the top by the bottom. 25 does not go into 16, so we need to put a decimal out of 0, move that decimal up. The 2 goes into 16 8 times, so I try it. 25 times 8. 8 times 5 is 40. Carry the 4. 8 times 2 is 16, and 4 is 20. That doesn't work. 25 times 7. 7 times 5 is 35. Carry the 3. 7 times 2 is 14, and 3 is 17. That doesn't work. Take 70 or 25 times 6. 6 times 5 is 30. Carry the 3. 6 times 2 is 12, and 3 is 15. Gives me 150. That does work, so it's going to go 6 times. That 6 would go above the 0. 6 times 25 is 150. Subtract, you get 10. Add another 0. Bring that 0 down. How many quarters are there in a dollar? 4 quarters. 4 times 25 is 100. Subtract, you get 0, and you get 6,400. Now to change it to a percent, what do we need to do yet? Do it 2 places to the right, and that gives us 64%. Okay? Any questions? Let's do one more real quick. Let's say that there were 24 cookies. 18 were chocolate chip. What percent is not chocolate chip? Okay, so you have 24 cookies, 18 are chocolate chip. What percent are not chocolate chip? Let's stop 1 second. What's the first thing we're going to do? Alyssa.
You're going to subtract the non-chocolate chip.
We have to make it into a fraction, right? what's the fraction asking for? Or what's the percent asking for?
What is not chocolate?
What is not chocolate chip? We know how many are. So Alyssa, in order to find our fraction, we're going to say what?
We're going to subtract the 18 from 24 to find out how much is not chocolate.
Exactly. So how many are not chocolate chip? 6. So the fraction we should use is what?
6 over 24.
6 over 24. Okay, be very careful what they're asking you to find the percent of. They want the percent that's not chocolate chip. Okay, now go ahead and solve it. Okay? Divide the top by the bottom. 24 does not go into 6. Put decimal out of 0. Move that decimal up. 24 goes into 60 how many times? Very good. 2. 2 times 24 is 48. Subtract. You get 12. Add another 0. Bring that 0 down. 24 goes into 120 how many times?
5.
5 times. 5 times 24 is 120. Subtract. You get 0. And now the last thing, to change it to a percent, we need to move the decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2, giving us 25%. Any questions? Your homework. Page 182.